Hope you're doing well today. So in today's message, I want to share some thoughts about polarity, and especially how it's a part, or at least at this moment in time, through my perspective, my lens, it's starting to look like it's a great part of the divine design. So we're going to talk about what this means for us. So if you think about it, God says in the Bible that He works all things for the good of those who love Him, right? So, and I just invite you to use your own lens. If you're not spiritual or religious, just I hope that you can still pull something of value from the message. If you're new to my channel, I want to say that. But so we know that everything works for our benefit, right? Even if the divine design is intentionally two-sided, right? Why is that? We're going to be talking today about how polarity in life, our experiences, right, can serve us by it's not always comfortable, right? Or it's rarely comfortable. But whatever happens when you're comfortable, not a whole lot. What happens when you have polarity at work is that things are shaken up, right? We are moved. We are transformed. Things happen, right? Things change. We change. And so, if you think about it, it's one of those things where, again, truth is true at all levels, right? At all different pieces and parts as you observe this reality. Truth is everywhere. You're going to see these synchronicities, these patterns of truth, and so it's true everywhere. So if we think about how we are changed because our life has been shaken up, because we have been moved in some way that has changed us forever by these extreme experiences, right? This is also true even if you look at the earth, right? It feels like there's been a lot more earthquakes lately. And what happens with an earthquake, right? Things are leveled. It's the same thing when you're baking and you've got, flour in a bowl and you're just kind of mixing everything up, and you're just, you're pouring it into your cake pan or whatever it is with your batter, and you want to, you have to kind of shake it and tap it on the counter to get all the air bubbles out, and it's leveled. You want to make sure that you get that good level before you pop it in the oven. It's the same thing with the earth. You have gases that escape the earth. You have the shaking of the earth. Mother Nature is incredible, right? And so it's these experiences that we go through in life that are also just very jarring in that same manner. It does require strength, and it also requires perspective to get through them, which we're going to talk about today. But ultimately, if we can be strong enough, like in the Bible it says, to stand, right, to literally withstand all this stuff that happens to us, then in the end we are changed. And a lot of times it is for the better. And so trauma, I've been reading this book, and it truly is an incredible book, but it's one that you really have to focus, and I feel like it's very deserving of a lot of time. But it's this book here, The Inner World of Trauma by Donald Kalshed. And so a lot of my thoughts these days are centered on promptings from that book. And so it talks about fragmentation from trauma in that book. And so if you think about it, if a person becomes fragmented in their psyche from this shocking experience, right, destabilizing experience that we label as trauma, if a person becomes fragmented from that, think about what that really means. Literally, it means that you may start out whole and it breaks you into pieces, right? Like a puzzle. So what do you do with a puzzle? You pull it together, right? It creates, when you purchase a puzzle in the store, which my daughter and I like to do puzzles together. It's it's a fun activity. But you start with all these broken pieces, right? And you the fun of it is that you don't know how they go back together, right? And so the only way that it makes sense that you're pulling these pieces together is that you're elevated. You're looking at it from this elevated view. And so as you're putting the pieces together, it's kind of like once you get 2 or 3 put together, now you have perspective to pull these other pieces together. So it's like this process, you know, of putting these pieces together, and it just it's a perfect, in my opinion, representation of how we have to put ourselves back together after going through an experience that was so polar opposite to what we, you know, what fit within our existing paradigms at the time, that it just totally ripped apart our whole perception of reality. Maybe we didn't literally go into the psychological process of fragmentation, you know, where we needed, you know, particular kind of therapy or whatever, but it still shattered paradigms, you know. It still shattered your current understanding of things, right? Again, it's one thing to read about these wolves in sheep's clothing in the Bible, but it's totally another thing to experience it firsthand in life. So this two-sided approach to examine our reality, it's like, oh my gosh, this is starting to really make sense now, you know, because it's like for everything there is an opposite, you know, and yet we want to try and stay away from this two-sided black and white thinking too, even though that seems to be the truth. So it's this, you know, what do you do when you're trying to meet in the middle ground? Take that middle path, like, you know, Buddha was talking about, right? The middle path, it's a coming together. It's almost like you can't come together if you don't first know what the extremes are, you know. And so all these experiences in our life, they serve to provide us with just more and more understanding of polarity, right? So that we can put together this whole and complete picture. So that's what we're going to talk about today. I was watching a video this morning, and I'll drop the link down in the description. I didn't finish the video, so I can't, you know, like sign off or attest to the fact that it's great or whatever, but the first part of it was really great, I can tell you that. I watched up until about 17 minutes or so, or maybe about 20 minutes, I think. But you know, the man that was being interviewed, he made a statement. He said, we live in a world where people feel that they control their own narratives, right? And I just, you know, I always try to be careful in all my videos and all my messages to differentiate between taking authority over what we can versus like deluding ourselves into this egocentric place of thinking that it all starts and ends with us, you know? That's kind of egocentric. I don't really know a better term for that. But in the video, he goes on to explain that in the past, people lived through a sense of relating to something greater than themselves. And that, you know, in contrast, nowadays, we don't really do that. It's kind of like we omit that part of it. We omit the greater part that's truly at work in our lives and affecting us. So, you know, I saw this video and I thought, yeah, I'm totally gonna I'm gonna use this as part of a message today. So this was really interesting to me, in particular because if you guys recall, if you've been watching my videos, I've been seeing this pattern and looking at the etymology of just all kind of different words, seeing the evolution of these words and how they start out from the lens of seeing the external and the greater, and then the words come to mean over time, they come to mean something personal and limited in that way, and a lot of times negative and or judgmental. So it's strange to see this pattern in the evolution of terms of our language, and I feel like it's starting, for me at least, through my perspective, to look valid, because I'm finding the same pattern in totally unrelated words as I did my research. So, yes. you know, if you think about it, I've heard a lot of people say this, at least over my lifetime. It seems like there's been a lot of people over the years that have been complaining about, you know, how in modern society it kind of seems like there's this move to take God out of everything, you know, and that's essentially kind of in so many words, I think what was being said here or implied in this message. And if you just take a moment to compare and contrast the past versus now, let's look at this. You know, in regards to spirituality, it was common in the past for people to perform exorcisms, right? That was a pretty common thing. I mean, even in the Bible, it talks about it, you know. And Jesus said, all these things I do, you know, you can do these things and even greater, which is really cool. But nowadays, there's a guy that has worked in the field of psychology for many, many years. He's got a really interesting YouTube channel. His name's Jerry Marzinski. And his perspective is that this is true, that there truly is a spiritual element to this existence, that there are other unseen entities at work in our lives. And he's devoting himself to making people aware that the field of psychology totally denies that, totally makes the effects that a person's dealing with psychologically, mentally, spiritually, and all this. He's pointing out that psychology is putting that on the person. It's all on you, you know. It has nothing to do with outside influence, you know, like any kind of dark spiritual entities or whatever. So I find that interesting that he's pointing out this polarity that's happened in the evolution of one's well-being and one's state of mental wellness. You know, it went from spiritual influence to it's all on you. There's no outside influence at all spiritually. So there's an example of polarity and how it's changed and shifted, you know, as we have just moved on in time. You think about the witch trials and all the different, you know, I think it was the Salem witch trials, all the different times in history where people have been persecuted, you know, and grouped together and labeled and stigmatized and all this stuff, right? And then if you look on the other end of the spectrum, we're taking a look at extremes, right, to highlight the concept of polarity. And then now it's kind of like you can see a person on a downward spiral sometimes, and this happens a lot in the teaching community. It's almost like you can predict. It's like you're like, man, I wish I could intervene and prevent something from happening with this kid or prevent them from doing something. And you can tell, you know, authorities about this kind of stuff. Like, I'm really worried about this person's mental state. But, you know, the law is that a person has to commit a crime first. You know, as far as my understanding anyway. I'm certainly no expert. But, and so it's kind of like, you know, it's, and look, this is a huge topic, and I'm not trying to make any kind of judgment or stance or anything like that, but obviously I'm all for peace and unity and being reasonable and logical. But I'm a spiritual person as well. So what I'm trying to highlight here is that middle ground, you know, being reasonable. But we're just looking at the examples throughout history, and then in our modern approach to reality and life, and how it seems like there's this, you know, we just swing from one end of the spectrum to the other, right? And then we have, in the past, there have been different cultures that have engaged in sacrifices within their tribe. You know, it's almost like they were trying to appease the gods, you know, like, well, if we sacrifice this person or these people or whatever, you know, every year in our ceremonies or whatever it was, you know, maybe the gods won't be mad and, you know, kill us all in this great catastrophe, you know. So that kind of stuff went on in the past. And then nowadays, it has shifted, you know, to the other end of the spectrum, that it's like, you know, totally personal responsibility, that, you know, it's all on your actions that create outcomes. And you know, even with trying to control nature and, you know, bad outcomes in nature, we've just turned to the, to the help, or we're seeking help through science. They're trying to learn and understand things and use preventative measures, right? And so, again, I'm not saying that any of these things are wrong or right, although I feel like anything violent is certainly never a good or right thing. But what we are seeing is this either or extreme approach to things, right? And we know that from dealing with wolves in sheep's clothing, unfortunately, that distraction is used, right? Which is like this whole look here, not here kind of thing, right? It's like a technique that they can use. And then if you consider reverse psychology, we're just looking at, opposite ends of the spectrum. If you look at reverse psychology, it's been said that if you want people to do XYZ, then you encourage ABC, which implies that people in general collectively have or share a rebel spirit, which is really interesting to me. But there seems to be some truth to polarity, that in itself may be the fragmentation aspect of the psyche that affects us all as an innate tendency, right? And then there are those that work to get to the middle ground, which is wholeness and also paradox. It's like reconciliation. It's like reconciling your perspectives, like roping them in from both sides of the spectrum and saying, hang on, this doesn't really make sense, or this is totally unethical, and then this is not, this is missing something over here. So it's kind of like, how do you reconcile everything right here to the middle ground, right? So, you might even say that darkness seems to be working in these extremes. We'll just kind of keep that thought. We'll hold that thought as we move forward in the message. But, yeah, instead of alpha and omega, it's kind of like, what if alpha and omega in our minds should include everything in between, right? But maybe we can't understand the wholeness until we've been shown both sides, okay? So I'm starting to think that the principle of polarity itself may be the tool of transformation, right? As part of the divine design. If you think about the middle path, which I mentioned earlier, being reasonable in all things, in the Bible, James chapter 3 verse 17 says, "But the wisdom that is from above is first pure, then peaceable, gentle and easy to be entreated, full of mercy and good fruits, without partiality and without hypocrisy." That sounds very reasonable, doesn't it? So it's like, if we want even more, an even more compelling sign that this design is a real thing, it's intentional from the divine, let's take a look at Isaiah chapter 45 verse 7, which says, "I form the light and create darkness. I make peace and create evil. I, the Lord, do all these things." Now, this doesn't say that God is evil. It says that he creates evil, right? So we start to understand that polarity, these two sides of this human experience, they create friction in our life, right? Not peace. Remember, Jesus even said, I didn't come to bring peace, but a sword. What does the sword do? It divides. And it's kind of like, okay, well, do we have to abandon the philosophy of approaching life from the stance of love, loving your neighbor? No. You have to be expanded enough to try and see both sides of everything to get the whole picture, right? Even, if you think about Mother Nature, even seeds and flower bulbs, and there's different different ones, I can't recall right in this moment which ones, but I know I've read about it, that have to be put in the ground like in late fall so that they can go through a frost in the winter first, so that they can be prepared to bloom in the spring and be healthy and do what they're supposed to do. They have to go through that frost first. Isn't that incredible? So it's kind of like if we're just going about our life, you know, unconsciously, we almost have to have these paralyzing, shocking experiences that cause us to, it gets our attention. It causes us to wake up, right? But if you think about any repelling objects, right? Like there's the Newton's third law. For every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. There's these little magnetic, you know, like swinging balls that you can, you know, you pick one up on the side and you let it go and it taps over here, and then this one swings and, you know, back and forth. That's what polarity does. It creates movement. It's like fuel to propel us, right? And again, that's where we get that whole it's not about peace but growth, right? And so polarity propels us to move forward. The ancient gods even were often related to emotions. So emotions even play a part in this polarity game, you might say, this polarity design or aspect of this design. Emotions to me are the human equivalent of these tools of polarity, like housed inside of us. And what do they do on one extreme and the other? They stir us, right? They move us. They create passion. And passion is what moves us, right? And then if you think about what is the primary thing in life, according to the Bible, it's wisdom. And it explicitly differentiates and says, furthermore, understanding. So if you think about what's required for wisdom, you know, we have to acquire it, right? We're not just immediately born with it, right? Not at least in a way that's comprehensible and digestible, but not in a way that we can make conscious, in other words, but experience, right? It gives us wisdom, but to get understanding, which is that second part, we need something more. We need what? We need context. We need perspective. And what gives us that? Different atmospheres, different seasons and circumstances, different feelings, different states of consciousness, different experiences. And you know, sometimes we learn the good by first learning the bad, by getting acquainted with the bad to see the other side. You know, a lot of times that's how we learn. But, you know, let me close with this. We'll never discover the whole story. We'll never put the whole puzzle together by staying on the same page of the book. It's comfortable there, but it doesn't move us. It doesn't change anything up, you know, and therefore there's no growth. So, yes. And, you know, in mentioning books, I want to just say I'm thinking about doing an episode where I just bring all of the most, the books that have made the most impact on me in my life. I want to just bring those into an episode and share them briefly with you. So, but we'll never break through the different barriers or levels of comprehension if we stay in the same place, right? So I just encourage you to embrace the journey. And I just hope that this has got the wheels turning for you. I hope that it's been inspiring and encouraging. I thank you so much for coming along to hear the message. And I hope that you have a beautiful day. And I'll see you again very soon.